Shalom, 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 brothers and sisters. Your brother Kazak back again. This time, I want to do a continuation of my last post. This is called Slavery Explained, right? Slavery Explained, okay? Now, slavery is servitude, okay? Servitude comes in many forms, right? Servitude could be a person who voluntarily serves as a servant or as a worker, or in modern terminology, employee. An employee is a slave. It is a slave by choice, right? It is a modern version of the indentured slave, which is the person who is a slave or servant by choice, right? When you go to apply for a job, you have an interview, and the company decides they want to hire you. You are an indentured servant, right? In a modern style, okay, or called employee, right? Now, we don't want to get slavery confused with captivity, okay? The so-called African American or African slave that was brought into America were captives. They were not, they became slaves or servant. They were forced, they were what you call chattel slaves. They were forced to work as servants, right? Without a choice, okay? They didn't sign a contract or covenant or anything of that nature to say, okay, I choose to work for you. They were forced to work for the person who either bought them or had rights to them, according to the laws of this land, right? So now, what I want to bring to your understanding is, I'll move a little bit, got a little air distraction here. What I want to bring a little more clarity to is the fact that when people talk about blacks should get over slavery, right? Let's get the records. Let's set the record straight, okay? In 1619, when President Donald Trump made reference to 400 years, he was simply talking about the 1619 entry of the so-called African Americans, forced entry of the so-called African Americans into the United States of America in Jamestown, Virginia. Okay? Now, here's what I want you to understand, right? Get over slavery, because from 1619 to 1865, which is when the 13th Amendment was passed, or called the so-called abolishment of slavery, the so-called African Americans who were enslaved in this country were forced to serve for 246 years, and their payment was what? A place to live, food to eat, and not the best food, scraps and whatever leftovers was from the master's table, and a place to live. Okay, you had two types of slaves. You had the in-house slaves who had a better way of living than the ones that were in the field, right? Those that worked in the field. So now, what I want to also bring to your understanding is that the slave master had what's called a plantation, right? And that's where the slaves that were forced to work as slaves worked from the plantation. Now, bringing you up into modern time. In the modern times, now they call the plantations plant for short. Okay? So, as a slave in today's society, or a person who has signed a contract, right, or become an employee of a company, that person has chosen to be a slave of that corporation for as long as the contract clause detail, okay? It could be a state that's an at-will state that they can fire you anytime, right? or if you decide you want to leave them, right? Um, if you don't give them a certain amount of time, they can put bad marks on your resume so that when you go to apply for another job and they track it down and find out that you left that employer without giving them 2 weeks notice, then they may decide to not hire you because they may consider you to be not an undependable person. They may not want to hire you, right? So what I'm saying is that in understanding slavery, you have to understand that slavery is not equal to captivity, right? Slavery is someone who has made a decision in today's modern time, and that's what I think Kanye was trying to say, is that slavery is a choice, okay, or being an employee. But let me add this here, okay? Everybody can't be an employee. There's too many people in this world. If everybody was an employee, who would be the workers? Right? Wouldn't be no workers, right? So everybody's not going to be an employer. However, if you have been called, or your destiny is to be an employer, then that may be for you to strive to do all that you can do to be the employer or to be the boss, because that's what you are called to do. Some of us are far much greater than an employee. And I find myself in that category. The more I work for somebody, the more miserable I am, because I am not an employee. I am an employer. I am an entrepreneur or a boss, right? And so I find myself a lot of times doing my own business, even when I am so-called employed by another employer. I still find myself doing things on the side to make wealth for myself and income and things of that nature, because that's my nature, is to be a boss or to be an entrepreneur, right? So I just wanted to share. I'm gonna say this last year. I'm gonna let this be it. So when Donald Trump was giving reference to the HR 1242, the House of Republicans, House of Representatives Bill 1242, it was more of a mockery, because if you go back and look at his campaign, right, he made a statement to the so-called African Americans about what the hell have you to lose by electing or by choosing him as his candidate, when he demonized Hillary Clinton, right? So that was what he was saying. No, in other words, what he was simply saying was, you blacks have been in America for 400 years, and what do you have to show for it, right? So let me help you to have something to show for. This was his pitch. That was his pitch to get votes. Okay, so what he was saying was, he was simply making mockery, right? Now, they proposed in this bill that they're going to evaluate the worth of the so-called African American slaves and what contributions that they have made in this country. Now, here's the thing I want to say. I'm gonna kind of step back into something, and I'm gonna get on up out of here. Okay, so in 1865 or 1863, the abolition or abolishment of the Emancipation Proclamation, I should say, was passed under the leadership of Abraham Lincoln. Now, here's the thing. 246 years went by, brothers and sisters. Okay, so now what do you say? Okay, we free the so-called African American slave. Now you're free, right? You didn't give us a damn thing. You just said, okay, you're free. Okay, all right, now you're free. Go ahead and do what you want to do. Do you, be successful. And some people actually have made accomplishments in our history. Some in my family have became landowners, right? much of the land in the county where I live at was owned by my ancestors, which later on happened to be stolen from us under the auspices of various different political reasons, which goes beyond my comprehension. But I mean, from a logical standpoint. And it happened in many other areas where they seized the land that belonged to the people that had it, and they used all kinds of political reasonings and were claiming that we couldn't find next to kin and that kind of crap, which is the biggest lie ever been told. But anyway, so now you have the Europeans and other nations in this country have had a 246-year head start, right, over the so-called African Americans as slaves. So why didn't the so-called government, they proposed that we're going to give you 40 acres and a mule, okay? If you want to be fair and give the so-called African Americans a right to be successful and to put us on an even plane, why wasn't the 40 acres and a mule given, right? So you're free. All right, go ahead and now do your thing. Do you. Okay. How about giving back some of that stuff that so-called African Americans and blacks invested in this land? So my question as I close is this. What is this 1242 bill going to do? Is this going to give us the 40 acres and a mule? You tell me. Is it going to put us on an even plane? Or are you going to give back the land that you so-called patriots stole from us? Okay? With that said, I'm out of time. And I'll talk to you at another time. Shalom, shalom, shalom.